Welcome everybody. We've just opened the webinar, so I imagine it will take a minute for everybody to just arrive. Nau mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou katoa. A very warm welcome to this HERMI webinar. My name is Talia Keogh-Rowden. I'm part of the Human Rights Measurement Initiative, or HERMI as we call ourselves for short. I'm your host for today's conversation as we release brand new human rights data to the world right now. And I'm just having trouble with my screen, so give me a second. Here we go. So I know people will continue to arrive for another minute or two, so I'll just begin with some housekeeping bits and pieces. Please do use the Q&A question and answer function throughout the webinar to submit your questions for us to answer at the end of the panel discussion if we have a few spare minutes. And HERMI team members will be able to answer some of them in writing while others are speaking. So if you have some questions that are straightforward for us to answer, then we'll just answer in writing for everybody to see. Now, you're probably aware that the session is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel shortly after the webinar. Of course, none of you will appear on the recording, just those of us who are speaking. Now, feel free to view the new data on your own screen as we go through it today. It's live now at rightstracker.org. And please consider following us on social media. We are at Rights Metrics on both Twitter and Facebook, and on LinkedIn you can find us at Human Rights Measurement Initiative. Those links will be in the chat box as well. After today, you're most welcome to email me directly with any inquiries, and I can pass you on to other team members as appropriate. Now, we are very glad to have you all with us today, drawn together, I think, by a common commitment to making our world better and kinder and fairer. We can't see all of your faces because this is a webinar, but we'd like to start by inviting you to respond to this poll, asking what part of the world you're in or from. And of course, this is optional, and some of you may have security concerns and not be willing to participate. But if you would like to, just so that we have a sense of who's out there, do feel free to answer this poll question. Oh, I can see some answers coming in. It's an unusual time that we're running this webinar. That means that nearly all the world is sort of awake, or could be, although it's quite late at night for us here in the Pacific. But I see people coming in from just about everywhere else. Fantastic, thank you. Now, we at HERMI, we measure human rights because we believe that what gets measured gets improved. We put hard numbers to the human rights situation in countries and then make those numbers public and freely available for others, people like you, to use in your work to improve people's lives. Now, I'd like to begin with a story of how organisations in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I live, used our data at this time last year. When our new scores for the whole world came out in June 2022, our colleagues at the National Amnesty International Office put out a press release responding to the scores and calling on the government to do better. So did the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, our NHRI, and other civil society organisations. Now, these scores, because of all of that civil society response, the scores were then on all the news programs, leading the TV and radio news. There were front page articles about human rights in national newspapers for 3 days. And on the 4th day, the Minister of Justice was forced to put out a detailed statement responding to the scores and the calls from civil society. So there was a direct line from our data to civil society advocacy, to media attention, to government response. And that's the kind of human rights discussion we want to facilitate. That's what we hope, all of you here today, we hope that you can see yourself in that kind of line, using our data to bring about positive change. Today, we are delighted to introduce our brand new 2023 measurements of the civil and political rights landscape around the world. In a moment, I'm going to show you around some of the scores, look at the rights tracker, and then we're going to hear from a few special people. Samuel Jayakumar is the founding director of the South Asia Forum on Freedom of Religion and Belief, SaFFORB, and he's worked for 2 decades with ecumenical movements on justice and human rights concerns. Trinh Huu Long is Hermes Honorary Ambassador for Vietnam and the co-director of Legal Initiatives for Vietnam, an NGO based in Taiwan that aims to promote human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Vietnam through independent journalism, research, and civic education. We are delighted to have both of them here today to respond to the data and to give some local, national, and regional context. And we're then going to hear about some of the global headlines from the data from Hermes civil and political rights experts, Dr. Kay Chad Clay and Matt Rains. A little bit more about us, Hermes, at a high level. We use co-design in everything we do. We try to include as many different voices as possible. Importantly, our methodologies are developed with input from human rights defenders working on the ground, as well as from the scholarly measurement community. Secondly, we're a diverse global team, a research collective with members in many different countries. Our research is peer-reviewed, it's widely accepted and used by scholars. You can read about the methodology in detail on our website and in various journal articles that are linked there. Now, importantly, we're entirely independent and not-for-profit. Our only interest is to do our best, to do our part to improve people's lives around the world. Our aim is to eventually measure all human rights and international law for all countries. Now, that's quite a big undertaking, so we've started here. We so far have 2 principal methodologies in action, one measuring 5 economic and social rights for most countries in the world, and one measuring 9 civil and political rights for around 44 countries so far. We're ready to expand this methodology to all countries as soon as we secure enough funding. If you're interested in the rights to education, food, health, housing, and work, the economic and social rights we measure, please join us next week at our Economic and Social Rights webinar. The details will be in the chat box. All our scores are published and freely available on rightstracker.org. For our 9 civil and political rights, we use a unique methodology. There are no international databases to draw on that are accurate and reliable. And if we used public sources like news reports, NGO reporting, or government statistics, we'd have a huge problem of a biased undercount, because we know that violations of these rights are happening either in secret or they're difficult to report on. So in every country, there will be an undercount, but it will be off by a different amount everywhere. It's not reliable data, especially not if you want to compare between countries. So we overcome that by going straight to local sources. We use a secure, anonymous, online questionnaire, surveying in-country human rights experts, and we ask them how common rights violations were in the previous year. So we are amplifying the voices of local experts in our research. We then use statistical methods to turn their answers into scores from 0 to 10, and we display those scores within uncertainty bands, credible intervals, on the rights tracker. Now, because we have to start from scratch for this research, it's a more resource-intensive methodology than some of the other work we do. So we currently run the survey in around 44 countries so far, but we are ready to expand the methodology to all countries as soon as we secure enough funding. Now, we also have information for these countries on people at risk. In all of the countries in which we run our survey, we ask respondents to tell us which groups of people are particularly at risk of having their rights violated. We have 41 people at risk groups that respondents can select from, for example, LGBTQIA+ people, or children, or journalists. This year we've added one new group, sex workers, for the first time. And we ask about these groups for all countries. And then we also provide the opportunity for experts to give us context that's specific to their country. And these data are displayed on the rights tracker, people at risk pages. The qualitative information, the extra context, you just need to click show more underneath the word clouds to see more information from survey respondents. We'd like to change pace and show you a short animated video now. It's a short explanation of how and why we measure civil and political rights, the way we do. You can find it on our YouTube channel later too. We'll put the link in the chat box, but I can just play it from here. Sometimes takes just a minute to start. Let's see how we go. Having trouble getting it to start. Yo-Yo, I think you've got it handy, so I might stop sharing and pass to you. So I'm just going to pass to my colleague who's going to share the video.
Human rights keep people safe and let them flourish. How do we tell if all countries are respecting people's rights and allowing them to flourish? If we want leaders to prioritize human rights, we need to measure them. What gets measured gets improved. Leaders of countries love numbers. What's GDP growth this quarter? How many people have jobs? The Human Rights Measurement Initiative, HRMI, is filling a gap in the human rights ecosystem. We use robust and peer-reviewed methodologies to track the human rights performance of countries and publish scores each year on our rights tracker. We are shining a light on human rights. We want countries to care so much about human rights that leaders call in their advisors and ask what they need to do to get their scores up. Civil and political rights, like voting rights, free speech, and freedom from torture and ill treatment, haven't been measured comprehensively until now, partly because it's unpopular with governments, and partly because of the desk drawer problem. People with accurate knowledge about, say, how many people were tortured last year often have bulging desk drawers, but lots of the cases they know about don't end up being published or counted. Maybe there isn't enough funding, or their organization has different priorities right now. So we go straight to those local experts in each country, and we ask them about the rights we measure, given all the information in their desk drawers. We want to produce reliable scores that are comparable between different people, across different countries over time. So we use a carefully designed, anonymous, and secure online questionnaire to find out what's really going on in each country. We ask about what people have observed in their country, and also about fictional countries, so we can place everyone's answers on the same scale. Then we act as a megaphone, amplifying the voices of all of those local researchers, campaigners, human rights lawyers, and journalists. Our megaphone turns their combined desk drawer knowledge into scores out of 10 for each country, displayed and freely available to the worldonrightstracker.org. We display scores within certainty bands. The narrower the band, the more certain we are of the score. We also ask everyone which kinds of people are at extra risk of having their rights violated, so you can search the rights tracker to explore the human rights situation for, say, refugees, or women and girls, or journalists, or people who are homeless. Please use your country's scores to advocate for the changes you want. Show your leaders the numbers and where they need to improve. Congratulate them when you see the scores go up. We publish annual updates each year, usually in June. Go to rightstracker.org to see how your country is doing. You can also get in touch if you want us to bring the survey to your country, or if you can help fund us to keep producing these data and expand our coverage. In today's world, change needs numbers. And we are producing them. Because human rights keep people safe and let them flourish. The Human Rights Measurement Initiative, measuring what matters.
Thanks, Yo-Yo. I'm not sure how it was for everybody else. My internet perhaps was the trouble, but it was a little bit laggy for me. And so I do encourage you to click on the link in the chat box and go and watch for yourself when you have a moment, if you would like a little refresher on how we do our methodology. I'm now going to share my screen and we're going to look at the actual rights tracker and look at some scores. So you can follow along. You can go to rightstracker.org. And take a look at the country or the issues that you are most interested in. And I just wanted to show you a few pages to give you an idea of the kinds of things that you could see. So I thought we would start by going to one of the countries in our survey, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and show the kinds of scores that we have available. So for every country has its own page with all of the data laid out. And so we have, for instance, the economic and social rights that you can see here, and then below that, the civil and political rights. So for civil and political rights, we divided into two categories: safety from the state, which includes the rights to freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention, forced disappearance, death penalty, extrajudicial execution, and freedom from torture and ill treatment. And these are scores from 0 to 10, with 10 being the state respects it beautifully. So death penalty has been abolished in DRC, and so they get a 10 for having no violations. But for other scores, a lot of violations pull their score down. And we have some little interpretation bands here, so you can just be sure of which way round it is. Then we have scores for the empowerment category, the rights to assembly and association, opinion and expression, and participation in government. These are the basic scores, and for most purposes, you don't need to go anywhere else on the page, on Congo's page, but you might want to see a bit more detail. So for civil and political rights, you can go to the safety from the state or the empowerment tabs, and you're going to see a lot more information. So you'll see the scores now within their uncertainty bands to show how certain we are of these scores. And you'll see the trends over time. And so you can see for assembly and association, the scores have fluctuated quite a bit in DRC over the 6 years that we've been measuring things. And then there's one other pretty important place to go, which is people at risk. And I thought I might take you to a different country just to show you that. So we might go to India, since we have Samuel with us today to speak about freedom of religion and belief in South Asia. We can see for India, if we go to empowerment, we have one brand new right that we are measuring, which is freedom of religion and belief. And you can see on the rights menu, or just by clicking the way I'm doing here, all our scores for this pilot study. We ran this survey question just in a pilot group of 9 countries this year, and these are the results. So Taiwan is a clear winner with a very high score. And then New Zealand and South Korea and Hong Kong are all clustered with overlapping bands with reasonably good scores there. Hong Kong is a significant, Bangladesh is a significant step down. And then we have 4 countries not doing well at all. We have Saudi Arabia, India, Vietnam, and China. And China is way down by itself at the very bottom here. And then if we go to India and back to India and look at the people at risk for all of our survey countries, not just these 9, you could see where religion is a factor in rights violations. So if we click on the people at risk tab, we see word clouds summarizing the people at risk information for all 14 rights. So we start with the right to education, for instance, and you can see the groups of people who are particularly vulnerable to missing out on education. And one of these groups is people with particular religious beliefs or practice, just sort of a generic category. And if I click there, we can highlight all the way down and see that religion is a factor in rights violations of all of the rights that we measure, all 14, It's showing up in all sorts of places, even in the right to housing, for instance. And then we get to the right to freedom from arbitrary arrest, and it's one of the main factors. And in fact, it's one of the most commonly identified factors when it comes to freedom from forced disappearance. Now, if we look at, say, here, freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention, whenever you get to the bottom of a word cloud, you can look at show more to see the qualitative information that people have given. And there's an awful lot of it with a lot of detail. Here's some detail related to freedom of religion and belief, for instance. And so you can see that religion is a factor in a lot of different violations, and you can see that there are a huge number of groups of people who are experiencing violations at a higher rate than the general population. That's a very short whistle-stop tour of some of the features of the rights tracker. I'm going to stop sharing now, and if you have questions, please do use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer them along the way. But now I'd like to welcome Samuel Jayakumar from SaFFORB, the South Asia Forum on Freedom of Religion and Belief, to comment on some of the things that we've just seen. He has seen the data before the rest of everybody else. So Samuel, can you just tell us what are some of your impressions? What are some of the things that strike you about the data that you've seen so far?
In general, there is a perception among the human rights activist organization and stakeholders that freedom of religion and belief is not the priority human rights concern. In that sense, if you see, the FOB issue has been marginalized within the human rights initiatives. I'm glad to see this year, the FOB data has been collected from 9 countries by Hermé in this year. So I think this is an important sign that you have been quite specifically focused on collecting FOB data. And this data, what you have brought, really highlighting some of the important FOB issues in globe, in fact. And just to take 2 examples, 2 big countries, China and India. And China scores 2.5, which is very bad. And India scores 3.5, which is bad. And imagine these 2 big countries on the FOB situation, their score. And all of us, we know that China and India have more than 1.4 billion people each, and that makes more than 1/3 of the world 8 billion people. So this is a huge number, and this number where the FOB score is quite a bad sign in terms of these 2 countries. Now, what could be the reason to have this less score? I just was looking into that. And particularly about India. India have recently have many states have bringing anti-conversion laws. Now there are around 12 states in India have a legislation which criminalizing religious conversion in various circumstances. And there are many states in the process of making this law. I'm just giving an example why this India could be having this score. And in China, the Uyghur crisis, all of us know, and then FOB as well as human rights restriction in general, that also makes getting the low score. So I think I just see why these 2 countries getting the low score. Now, I also want to, my second pointing is about the Bangladesh, which is in South Asia, which is scoring quite well, particularly on freedom of religion and belief. Bangladesh got around 6.3 on the FOB concern. It's fairly comparatively with a big neighbor like in India, it's comparatively better score. And but then we need to be little precautious about this score, even for Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, elections are preceded with violence. So the general election is coming in 2014. So in the past, the election process really brought a lot of violence against religious minorities, particularly Hindus and Buddhist communities in Bangladesh. So the election process always lead to quite violence. So the score can change next year differently in all these countries. But then Bangladesh, we need to look at quite positively of this score. That's 6.3, they got it. And I think they need to see how they also know there is always possibilities the violence will happen during the election process. How do we keep at least this one? So I think everyone also needs to look at positively this course and need to improve the situation. And particularly like in India, India being a big brother in South Asia, and they need to see of the different small countries score. For example, Nepal is doing quite fairly very well. So I think it needs to be also looked into positively. How do we improve using this course? Yeah.
Thank you. That was a really good tour around the region. It's great to have your expertise on all of those countries. I guess following on from just your last point about the improvements you want to see and thinking about what your organisation, SaFFORB, is working towards, what's your message to governments about respecting freedom of religion and belief? What would you like to see change? How do you want the world to be?
Yeah, I think my message is to please be open-minded to address the human rights issues, any human rights issues. And always the government should be open to have a dialogue with civil societies. And then they should not think the civil societies are enemies to the state. I think that is the challenge the civil societies also face in many of these countries. So I think the government needs to be open. They don't need to say that, no, it is, there is a tendency that, no, this data is wrong. This is a bad situation. So you don't need to tell like that, rather to be open, having a dialogue, and then work with the civil societies.
Thank you so much, Samuel. It's great that you're here for the whole webinar. We may have some questions that come directed to you, or we may have time for all of us to have a further chat at the end. But I'm now going to move over to Trinh Huu Long from LIV. Long, thank you. It's wonderful to have you with us here too. Can you give us your sort of general impressions on Vietnam's scores?
Great, thank you, Talia, and for your great presentation and for HIMI work in measuring human rights. And if we look at the human rights scores of Vietnam for civil and political rights, you will see that most indicators are in the very bad section. A few indicators fall into the bad area. So this, I think, fairly reflects the reality of human rights in Vietnam. And I would say that this is not only bad or very bad, but we are actually in the worst situation for human rights since at least 2000. And the situation keeps getting worse over the past few years. If you go back to Vietnam in 2015, you would have a sense of civil society rising, emerging, or maybe booming. You will have a sense of having a little space for meaningful political discussions. And you will have some sense of optimism, of hope that Vietnam is slowly changing, but it's gone. Since 2016, the conservative faction of the Communist Party sort of took power, and they reshaped human rights in Vietnam in a very bad way. And since then, we have almost I think almost no more protest. We have almost no more independent media outlets in Vietnam. And since 2021, there is a very new and very concerning phenomenon happening, is that the government is trying to get rid of even registered NGOs in Vietnam, with so far 5 NGO leaders are being put in jail now. So that is and also we have well-known and prominent human rights activists and human rights lawyers fleeing the country, seeking political refuge in Thailand, in other countries. So that is a very bad situation we are in, and it is getting worse. And I believe that these kind of measurements will put the data out there, and to prove that we are actually getting worse year by year, and data doesn't lie. So I hope that these data will tell the public and the Vietnamese government a little bit about where we are right now as a country. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess that brings me on to my second question, which is, about some of the persecution happening. You run 2 magazines. You run, Loc Qua and the Vietnamese independent media outlets. Presumably that's not easy. The latest data show yet again that journalists are at particular risk of a wide range of rights violations in Vietnam, from the right to housing, for instance, to the right to freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention. So could you tell us a bit more about the media landscape in Vietnam, and I guess why running these media outlets is important to you?
Right, yeah. So before I talk about the media landscape in Vietnam, I'm a journalist in exile, right? What kind of countries have journalists in exile? We are talking about China, North Korea, Myanmar, Russia. So we are that kind of countries, right? And behind me is a painting of my one of my co-founders, and she is my best friend. She is one of the most well-known and talented journalists we have had in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. She is in jail now, serving a 9-year imprisonment sentence. So what does that say about the media landscape in Vietnam? We are having 700 or 800 media outlets, but there is a very famous saying in Vietnam, is that that many outlets have only one editor-in-chief, which is the Communist Party's propaganda chief, right? And we have on paper we have no private media. That is not allowed. So, but in fact, we do have some private media outlets under the umbrella of the governments. But also at the same time, we have hundreds of journalists and bloggers and Facebook users being either harassed or prosecuted, or are serving prison time in jail now. So we are ranked just above 2 countries on the Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders. Those are North Korea and China. So I think we are a small copy of China in terms of media. We are luckier than Chinese people that we are having a sort of freer and more accessible internet. So we do have access to a variety source of information. But so far, there is no independent media outlet can survive in Vietnam. We used to have some, but the government have put all the journalists and media professionals, independent people in jail. So basically, talking about independent media, most of them are in exile. We are operating from Thailand, from Taiwan, from the US, and from some cities in Europe as well. That is a very bad situation we are in.
Yeah, it certainly is. Thank you for sharing that and for showing us the portrait of your colleague behind you. Thank you. Now, LOV Data, speaking about internet freedom, is a documentation project that Legal Initiatives for Vietnam is doing. So can you tell us more about that project and the work on advancing internet freedom and religious freedom? I guess, why is it important to make data like this and Hermes research freely available?
Right. So we started this small project a few years ago because we started with religious and belief, freedom of religious and belief, because that was the one human rights, very fundamental and basic human rights, that is not only underreported, but also almost not many people really pay attention to. So we started to collect the data to see the big picture. So we collected cases of violations. And as a media organization, data collection is in the heart of our operation, right? We have to gather the data and see what kind of stories we can tell. So putting the data out there for the public is what we did a few years ago. We collect the data and we share the data with the public. Now we are expanding to other areas, including internet freedom, and also we are monitoring legislative agenda in Vietnam to see what kind of laws and decrees are in the table right now, and trying to engage the public in the legislative, the lawmaking process. Having this kind of data give us a better sense of the big picture. And also, we have to achieve these data because data tend to disappear from the internet after a while. So the Vietnamese government does manipulate their state-owned media, and they take down content, they remove content, and they collaborate very closely with Google and Facebook and other technology platforms to remove data. So we do achieving this data just to preserve the information for research and for journalism. We have to preserve them. Otherwise, after a while, we are having no more data.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds really important. Thank you for doing that work, and thank you for your partnership with us. We really appreciate your involvement with Hermes. And thanks for being with us here today, and glad you're staying with us for the rest of the hour. We're now going to head over to welcome two of our key civil and political rights team from Hermes to discuss a few global headlines from this year's data. So Dr. Chad Clay is one of Hermes co-founders. He's our methodology, research and design lead. And Matt Rains is our civil and political rights lead. So Chad, you first, but you can both stick around. We'll be going quick fire between the two of you. First off, what are some things that stand out to you from the data?
Yeah, thanks, Talia. I mean, as is usually the case, too many things, more things than we can talk about, in the time we have here. And there's always so many stories, right, in our data that come out every year. So, I have a few things in mind. I'm sure Matt has a few things in mind. But if anybody watching is, interested in a country that we don't get to, I just really strongly encourage you to go check it out on the Rights Tracker. Look at the data we have there, and feel free to reach out if you have questions or things that you'd like to know more about those data. One of the stories though that stands out to me this year, and it's similar to the past few years, it is really the massive change we've seen in empowerment rights in Hong Kong over the last few years. 3 years ago, as I'm sure many of our viewers know, 3 years ago, China passed a national security law for Hong Kong that effectively served to criminalize many forms of political expression and protest that are critical of the Chinese government and its relationship with Hong Kong. And the Chinese government has also overhauled Hong Kong's elections in such a way that the ability of people to directly elect positions on Hong Kong's legislative council has been greatly reduced, and in fact, who can run for office has been greatly restricted, and in many cases depends on your expressed political opinions and beliefs in the past. Some media organizations, trade unions, and opposition groups, have effectively had to shut down all of their operations in the face of direct government interference in their work, and oftentimes the arrest of many of their members. Now, our data have largely reflected this over the last few years. We see a huge decrease in respect for the rights to political participation, assembly and association, and opinion and expression in Hong Kong over those last 3 years. And for the first time, in the 4 years of the data we've been collecting for Hong Kong, we didn't see a decrease in those rights this year. Things seems to have sort of settled out, but they've settled out at this very low level of respect. This just kind of slightly better than what we see in mainland China. Basically on every single one of these rights, Hong Kong performs slightly better than China does. But China is sitting at the very bottom of our scale, and Hong Kong's really only outperforming China and Saudi Arabia on a regular basis. It typically, Vietnam and Hong Kong on empowerment rights tend to look a whole lot like one another in our data now. So in many ways, it would seem that policy changes in Hong Kong have sort of pushed it to looking more and more like mainland China when it comes to these empowerment rights. But there are still some interesting differences between those two countries on sort of our civil political rights in general. First, Hong Kong, on one of our empowerment rights, Hong Kong does appear to vastly outperform China, and that's on the new freedom of religion and belief data. So that indicates, at least in the area of freedom of religion and belief, China hasn't really made moves to align Hong Kong's practices with those of the Beijing government yet. And second, safety from the state, the rights to be free from forced disappearance or extrajudicial killing, arbitrary political imprisonment, torture, ill treatment. Those remain, much better respected, those rights in Hong Kong than they are in China, which again are potentially the worst that we observe in our data set. And in fact, in this last year, we saw improvements in Hong Kong scores for arbitrary and political arrest and torture and ill treatment. That actually might sound better than it really is, though. And I don't want to give the false impression that, so things are improving in Hong Kong. I'm not sure that that's actually what the data tell us, right? In order to receive a bad score on things like freedom from arbitrary arrest or freedom from torture and ill treatment, a state has to actively have engaged in torturing or ill-treating someone, or arbitrarily arresting someone, or politically imprisoning someone. And there's good reason to understand the reduction in those kinds of practices over the last few years as representing more of a reflection of Hong Kong's change over the last few years rather than an improvement. So, in 2019 and 2020, when there were many protests in Hong Kong, the Chinese government largely responded with a campaign of cracking down police abuse and overreach, and arrests of people who publicly spoke out against the government. And even in the aftermath of those protests, with things like the national security law and other laws being passed, there's been a somewhat concerted campaign from Beijing to engage in the arbitrary and political arrest of people who had spoken out, both in ways critical of the Chinese government, or in favor of more democracy in Hong Kong or more independence for Hong Kong. But at this point, that program of arrest, crackdown, and criminalization of expression has kind of had its desired effect. People now self-censor. Protests are far less common, and publications critical of the Chinese government have largely been shuttered. So in general, the government doesn't really need to resort to the level of arrests that we saw a few years ago, because many of those who participate in those kinds of activities in the past have already been arrested. And the remaining populace is aware that arrest is the likely result of engaging in these kinds of forms of peaceful expression. So in short, what we're really observing is the new normal, in which empowerment rights are just simply less enjoyed in Hong Kong than they were a few years ago. And it seems like that's fully established now. That said, to end this little segment with slightly better news, Taiwan remains something of a bright spot in the region, with scores in the fair or good regions of every one of the civil and political rights that we measure. There are other countries in the region that are performing quite well. South Korea does quite well on many of the rights that we measure as well. There's way more I could say about all that, but we should move on. But I'll direct people who are really interested in this question to a data launch we'll be holding just next week. That's dedicated to human rights in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So if you're interested in what's happening in these countries, I really strongly encourage you to sign up for that webinar.
Thanks, Tad. Back to you again shortly, but let's whip over to Matt, who's coming to us from Scotland today, off for a conference. So Matt, what are some of the things that stood out to you, taking us to different parts of the world, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to hone in a little bit on something that's a little bit more contextual across countries than maybe a specific case. The impact that elections are having on our data, specifically like when elections are upcoming and we see this sort of ramp up to an election day, is really becoming clear a lot of times when we see our empowerment rights scores. So to put it shortly, when we're in this case where elections are forthcoming, we end up in this position where opposition movements that are centered within them, dissidents, protesters, continue to be some of the primary targets for state officials and forces that are looking to engage in abuses of human rights. So even some cases that have shown like this potential for positive growth and places that have maybe been a bright spot in past years, we've sort of seen this trend down. Democratic Republic of Congo, President Tshisekedi's regime is a really great example of this, because there's an election coming up this year. And in last year's Hermi data, we really begin to see this ramp up sort of take place. So, here we had a peaceful transition of power into the current regime, to the point where many organizations and many human rights advocates were taking note of at least positive steps, right? And so seeing the reversion of exile, seeing political prisoners sort of being released. And so building up this goodwill and sort of hope going in that maybe this next election is going to be significantly more peaceful, have significantly more less rights abuse that's tied up in it. This was particularly in the case with empowerment rights. So assembly and association, opinion and expression, and the right to participate in government. Hermi data reflects these positive steps up until 2020, where we have a positive trend for all three of them. But unfortunately, in the case of two, they have stagnated. And in the case of assembly and association, we have seen this significant rapid negative decline in DRC score leading up until this next year. Our respondents have noted that human rights advocates, political opposition, people suspected of political violence are among the most targeted. And then we get even more context in terms of, our qualitative responses, where we see that every level of political organization, unions, lobbying groups, tribal organizations, and even just internally displaced people advocating for their own interests are targeted by the government. And so in short, here we see something that's sort of emblematic of some of the cases where elections are coming, where political organization is just targeted at every level.
And so you're saying direct targeting is a common tool for leaders when elections are coming up?
Yes, but I don't want to downplay the impact that indirect targeting and indirect crackdowns are having as well. We're seeing that being more and more effective for governments as well. And we're continuing to see that show up, not just in respect for empowerment rights, but also in the qualitative data that we collect. So this type of repression that's more bureaucratic in nature is continuing to appear in really insidious ways. Chad mentioned, one dimension of, sort of dealing with not allowing these instances of abuse to occur in the first place by arresting anybody who they could take place against. We sort of see different dimensions to this with other countries. Thinking particularly about in the Hermi data where we have these prolific examples where political opposition has been tamped down by some of these rules and ambiguous regulation rather than direct violence and torture. India has been a great example of some of these laws. And the qualitative for this last year has covered a wide range of ways that this happens. Bangladesh canceling protest licenses arbitrarily. Kazakhstan limiting the registration of dissident organizations. And so governments are aware of the effectiveness of these more bureaucratic type of tools and are increasingly using them. And so we've got to be really cognizant of that and how we as the international human rights community sort of deal with this new dimension of tamping down on empowerment rights.
Thanks, Matt. We're coming to the last 10 minutes of our time together, so we'll probably only have time for one more question to you two for now, but we'll have other opportunities. Chad, you're based in the United States. That's a country we haven't talked about today yet, so can you tell us a bit about how the US scores are doing?
Sure, yeah. So the United States, is continuing to stand out, but not in a good way. It remains, I would say, the worst performer among high-income democracies in our data, though the United Kingdom and Australia both give it some stiff competition on a few of the rights we measure. There were improvements in some areas over the last few years in the United States, namely in forced disappearance and in torture and ill treatment. But the US's scores overall remain woefully low for a government with its resources. And as you know, I could probably speak at these problems at length, and I kind of have. And so I won't take up our valuable time here. I'll refer people to a TED talk I gave just a few months ago that I think we can put in the chat now, where I got into some depth about both our human rights data, but also what they would mean for the United States if we really focused on them. And in fact, I actually used a slightly new data set that we've been working on that we're currently calling Rights Tracker Investor. Not entirely sure what its long-term name will remain because we're still playing around with that, but it uses a methodology to create a more complete data set of every country in the world, both relying on our survey data and other sources of human rights data. And relying on those data, I talk about this some in the TED Talk. We found that in 2021, the United States was 114th out of 195 countries on safety from the state, which I'm pretty sure makes it the worst performing high-income democracy on that measure. It was 43rd out of the 178 countries on empowerment, which is slightly better, but still a very, very low ranking for a country with the massive resources that the United States has. In this year's data that are on the rights tracker for the United States, there are a few other things that stand out that I don't get to in that TED talk. First, as is the case every single year, our survey respondents identified that people of particular races, especially Black people, Latinx people, and Native American people, that those folks were at most risk for the vast majority of rights violations that we measure. Also connected to headlines that we've been seeing in the United States, we saw that LGBTQIA plus people were increasingly mentioned as being at risk for violations of their rights to opinion and expression this year, which is unsurprising in light of a lot of new policies targeting particular forms of the expression of gender identity that were proposed and passed here in the United States in the past year or so. And to add on to that, I think to give us a bit of a sneak preview for another data release we're having in just a few days, the data release for our economics and social rights data, we saw large increases in the proportion of respondents stating that LGBTQIA plus people, women, and girls were all at high risk of lacking full enjoyment of their rights to health in the United States. This just is sadly not very surprising in light of the many changes in U.S. policy we've seen over the last few years. Several states have targeted transgender people with laws restricting access to gender-affirming healthcare in 2022. That trend has continued and intensified in 2023. Likewise, as I'm sure at least some of the viewers know, in June 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the Roe v. Wade decision that guaranteed pregnant people the right to abortion. Several US states have followed that decision by implementing bans and restrictions on abortion, which jeopardizes the full enjoyment of the right to health by many women, girls, and other people who can become pregnant all across the country. So, if you're interested in those kinds of things, I really recommend that you check out the data release on the Rights Tracker now.
Thanks so much, Chad. I think we could talk more about everything that everybody has started talking about. I'm sharing my screen now, and just wanted to sort of say a bit of kind of what's next. I figured that, I have a few questions and suggestions here. You will have other thoughts, but I'd like to make some space for some of these things. What interests you most about the Hermy data? How can you imagine incorporating the data into your work? Are there questions that remain for you? And I want to say, how can we help? Because we at Hermy really do want to engage with you to help you use the data. I'd like to invite you to follow us on social media, and do check out all of the resources on our YouTube channel, because we have a lot of workshops in a lot of different languages to help you really dig down into the things that you're most interested in. I've also got my email address on the screen, and it will go in the chat box because it's difficult to spell and copy down accurately, but do get in touch if there's anything we can do to help. And now I'd like to just close by showing you some faces. Our work at Hermy is the product of hundreds of people's contributions. And here are just some of our Hermy country ambassadors. These are human rights defenders from all over the world. Some can't be named or pictured because it's not safe for their names to be publicly known. So this isn't everybody, it's just some of them. But these people are some of the, essential workers of the human rights community, people who devote their lives to defending human rights and improving people's lives. So we want to end this part of today by, oh, thank you. I think my screen wasn't working so well. My screen sharing wasn't working so well. We just want to end by bringing to mind some of the people who we know, and some of the people maybe who we don't around the world, who are working all together to contribute to the work of making this world better and kinder and fairer. So as you rest your eyes on some of these wonderful faces and maybe bring to mind some of the people you know or whose work you know, we might just spend a quiet moment in gratitude for all the people who are working to make the world better. And now I'd just like to close by thanking all of our guests, Samuel Jayakumar, Trinh Huu Long, Chad Clay and Matt Rains, and thanking all of you who are watching the YouTube live stream or who've joined us here in the webinar. Thank you for the questions that you've asked and the questions that I hope to see in my inbox in the coming days. And thank you for all the work that you are doing in the world to promote human rights, to encourage governments to treat their people better. We're going to now close the webinar and look forward to seeing you in other places in the future. Thank you.